Is the lighting going to be just terrible in this? Can we handle some very yellow lighting? Because I don't want to put contact lenses in. Can you tolerate this? Welcome to Dead Good Book Reviews, I'm Judith, and today I'm bringing you a review of one of the best sequels to ever grace the planet. What could I possibly be talking about, asks the person who didn't look at the thumbnail or the title of this video. Can a star be morally ambiguous? And what are Kloes that Klank? All these questions and more are answered in Dodie Smith's The Starlight Barking. As you'll see, as a professional literary analysis person, haha, I read this recently and filled it with post-it notes that are little dogs that a friend brought me back from Japan. So I'm very science and serious. Welcome to serious literary review time. Yes, this is of course a sequel to 101 Dalmatians. No, I'm not talking Patch's London Adventure. No, I'm not talking 102 Dalmatians. I'm talking an honest-to-God sequel of the original book written by Dodie Smith. The Starlight Barking is madness. I've been wanting to film this video for quite some time. Let's start with some history. 101 Dalmatians was originally published in 1956. It's a great story about a husband and wife Dalmatian team who go on a quest to save their stolen puppies from Cruella de Vil, the evil woman who wants to turn their puppies into a Dalmatian fur coat. It's a gorgeous book, and if you haven't read the original, I really recommend it because it's absolutely spellbinding. But we're not here to talk about that book. Skip ahead 11 years. It's 1967. A new book has hit the shelves. Dodie Smith has written a sequel following on directly from the events of book 1. But what else is happening in the 60s? The space race. So what do you get when you mix beloved children's book characters with the 1960s space race? You get the Starlight Barking. So this is less of a review and more of a recap, but you clicked on this video and you're still here, so enjoy. We open with Pongo, our hero from book 1, thinking back on the past. Like many a hero, he finds he isn't entirely satisfied with his now mundane life. At home in the old house where his children were once kidnapped, now Mr. Dealey adopts out the 101 plus Dalmatians that for some reason he hasn't decided to spay or neuter, he just adopts them out, likely driving the market price of Dalmatians down. We won't question this too much. I can understand why she wouldn't want to get into this in a children's book, but spay and neuter your pets. But Pongo's ennui is soon gone as he wakes to realise that he slept in. What's more, the humans and the cats that live there, you would know about the cats if you'd read the original book 1, they're sleeping too. He rouses his wife, Mrs., and they try in vain to wake the sleepers. It's like the start of a science fiction-y horror movie, but with dogs. It transpires that all the creatures in the world, except dogs, are asleep. But it's okay, because not only are none of the dogs hungry, but also, if they need a door opening, it just sort of opens for them. They head out and chat with a nearby sheepdog from book 1, again. There's a lot of continuation. You need to read book 1. They head out to talk to the local sheepdog, and things are all the same there. But then they hear a distant barking. And when I say distant, I mean really distant, because it's their daughter Cadpig barking all the way from London. Yes, it's dog telepathy. Welcome to this book. Okay, we need a little bit of a tangent here to explain what happened to Cadpig and to explain who Cadpig is if you don't remember. So Cadpig was the runt of the litter in book 1. She's really, really cute. They carry her around in lots of cute things. She has a wagon at one point. It's really adorable. But in this book, we're told that though the Dealeys intended to hang on to all of the puppies from that original litter, Cadpig sneaks in Mr. Dealey's car when he's taken off to the government because he's an accountant who can fix things, and she meets the Prime Minister, and essentially the Prime Minister likes her so much and she does so much for his public persona when he appears on television that he just decided to keep her. And it's not important right now, but it will become important later that the rest of the cabinet also decide to get dogs. Just remember that for now. So now that the Prime Minister is stuck asleep, that by default makes Cadpig the dog Prime Minister. All making sense so far? Any questions, queries? Cadpig asks if her father will come to London because he's so good in a crisis. He'll come to London, would he bring some Dalmatians? Mrs. points out that it's rather a long way. Cadpig then introduces us via her telepathy to what I think is the best part of this book, swooshing. Essentially, in amongst all the other metaphysical powers that dogs now have, they can now sort of fly? It's described more as being like a hovercraft, but yep, they can move really fast now, so it's off to London. So off they set, but not before Mrs. has told us about the weird dream she had the night before where she saw a bright light, but Pongo doesn't really care about Mrs. because she's a silly woman, so off they go to London. Let's return to the source material, shall we? Okay. Here's where things start to get interesting. Pongo was about to say something soothing when he saw a look of horror come into his wife's eyes. He said quickly, "What is it? What's wrong?" Then he saw what she was looking at. Partly hidden by some small houses was a factory with a signboard on the top of it on which was painted in scarlet, "Cruella de Vil and Co., makers of Kloes that Klank." Kloes that Klank? To Pongo it didn't make sense, but it did to Mrs. because she was a bad speller. Women. She said at once, "It means Kloes that Klank, but all that matters is she's back in England, that wicked woman." Seeds of plot begin to develop, or will it be completely irrelevant? Only time will tell. Because they are famous dogs, they get a police escort into Downing Street. Cadpig introduces them to the dog cabinet, which is of course all the dogs of the people on the cabinet, and the shadow cabinet. It's quite telling that this book gave me a better political education than my entire time at secondary school. It's not important yet, but it's worth mentioning that at this point, Roly-Poly, who was the fat puppy, because it's the 60s and that's funny, who is now the fat dog, goes off with the other fat dog, the Foreign Secretary, and we don't know where he's gone. Just keep that vaguely in your mind. Cadpig's having a crisis of confidence. She's brought all of these dogs to London. Hundreds of thousands of dogs. It's unclear how many dogs there are, but lots of dogs. And now she doesn't know what to do. What are they meant to do? She asks Pongo to speak at her cabinet meeting, gives a stellar speech. He also telepathically sends that speech out to all the dogs in London and maybe the surrounding areas, it's unclear. But basically it boils down to, he says, "Wait and see." Which, you know, it's a fairly good example of political speeches. It seems to do the trick for dogdom, and everyone calms down a little bit. Next bit of news comes right out of the blue. The sheepdog is barking to them all the way from, I think, Suffolk. The cats are awake. Not all the cats, just the 2 cats that lived at Hell Hall, and also the young boy that the sheepdog looks after called Tommy. How can this be? Well, it turns out that after the events of book 1, and because of their bond with dogs, the cats and Tommy are honorary dogs. So it would seem the magic works on them too. Plot convenience. So they're coming to London and the small boy Tommy is going to drive the tractor. Well, no, he's going to sit on the tractor and they're going to make it fly to London. That's right, we have a hover tractor. Okay, so they meet the sheepdog and the cats at the house where they used to live, but the door doesn't open for them, so there's just like a little moment of nostalgia, and then they think, we should probably go check on Cruella de Vil in her old house and just check that this is nothing to do with her and that she's asleep. Again, we return to our source material. In case you haven't read book 1, so you haven't got more of her character, this is just a little bit of scene setting. Pongo was reading a recipe which lay on the table. It was headed, "My favourite pie." He said, "Listen to this. Line a pie dish thickly with black pepper. Sprinkle with a little meat. Put a thick layer of white pepper, then a thick layer of horseradish mixed with mustard. Top with red pepper. Serve very hot." "You couldn't serve that cold even if you froze it," said Mrs. We finally find the answer of what are Kloes that Klank. Pongo then saw that there were racks of plastic coats, just as there had once been racks of furs, but it must be some new kind of plastic. No ordinary plastic raincoat could make the noise these coats made as the curious dogs examined them. Clank, clank. The noise got louder and louder. If the de Vils had been wakeable, it would certainly have wakened them. Young Tommy managed to lift a coat from the rack and held it in the light from the window. It seemed to be made of shining black tin. After a moment he dropped it, murmuring something. "He says it's too heavy to hold," the sheepdog explained. "The woman must be dressing herself in some kind of armour." Is there something significant in Cruella de Vil going from like soft furs to hard armour? I don't know. It's never really explained, so we sort of get what's Cruella up to now, but is anyone buying these clothes? Who's wearing them? What's happening? It's not important in this book. Now I know what you're thinking, because you're discerning readers, you can spot a plot hole from a mile away. Why did Cruella's door open for the dogs when their old house didn't? But don't worry, Dodie Smith has thought of everything. As the front door opened to let them out, Mrs. said to Pongo, "It turned out that we didn't really need to get into Cruella's house, so why did the kitchen door open to let us in?" "Because we needed to know that we didn't need to," said Pongo. She's covered all bases. They head on back to Downing Street and decide what they really need is for the television to work, and because it's a magical, magical day, it does. And what should appear but the bright light that Mrs. had a dream about earlier? A voice emerges and talks to them, and it explains that all dogs need to get to open spaces, central open spaces at midnight. So all the dogs in London need to go to Trafalgar Square. Rather than explain what is about to happen, the voice echoes Pongo's useless speech from earlier and tells them all to wait and see. How are they going to get through the hordes of dogs lining the streets of London? With a tractor? How are they going to get there? Mrs. has solved it. She is the unsung heroine of this book. She invents the high swoosh, which is essentially flying, but in this case they're also lifting a tractor very high in the air, so that's fun. They get to Trafalgar Square and they wait for midnight. And all of a sudden, just as the clock starts striking, all the dogs in the square experience the most happiness they've ever felt before immediately being plunged into terrifying pitch black. The voice turns up again and explains that from now on, if they want, they can experience just that happiness, that bliss, forever, and never experience fear again. If the plot device was not in fact Cruella de Vil, who was it? Again, we return to the source material. Now the star blazed brighter, and the voice spoke louder in a deep tone that was musical but also a bit like thunder. Not frightening thunder though, just gently powerful thunder rolling around the midnight sky. The musical thunder said, "I am Sirius, Lord of the Dog Star. For millions of years I've looked down on the earth. I remember dogs when they were wild and savage animals. I've seen them change to tamed and often pampered creatures, and wild or tame I've always loved them and wished they could be with me on my lonely star, but never in the past did I feel I had the right to entice them away from the earth. Now at last I have that right, for soon, through human foolishness, there may be no earth, or no earth as you know it now, and those few of you who survive will be desperate, starving wretches fighting each other, eating each other, just in order to go on living a life that isn't worth living. Do you understand? Let's remember that this is 1967, so we're around the time of the Cold War. Essentially, Sirius, the dog star, wants all the dogs in the world to go live in space with him. That's the book. How will that work though? Will the humans not remember dogs? All other humans and all sleeping animals will simply wake to find a dogless world, and they won't remember there were ever such animals as dogs. But there will be our collars and leashes and kennels and dog beds and all sorts of things to remind them of us, said Cadpig. I'll work something out about that, said Sirius, though it might be simpler to let them all go on sleeping forever. To prove that he's nice and friendly, Sirius becomes a dog. So on the top of Trafalgar Square in this instance, they all see a dog, and it's important to note that they all see a dog that is the same breed as they are. Because of course they do. All the dogs in London decide the best people to make the decision will be 3 Dalmatians, one of whom in fairness is the Prime Minister, but still, they get to decide the fate of all dogdom. So Pongo, Cadpig, her cabinet, and some other dogs all head into the National Gallery to deliberate. Yep, they've got to decide whether they want to go to space or not. I just want to keep reminding you that that's the plot. The Great Dane turns up, again, only relevant if you've read the first book, but the Great Dane is a very important character and I love him very dearly. I knew it, I said to Sam. He came out to Hampstead Heath with me. I said, they'll be fooled, all those dogs in Trafalgar Square. Crowds are always fooled. They get themselves so worked up they can't think for themselves. I know about these things because I live with a professor who often talks about them. All you dogs are the victims of mass hysteria. This is where this book gets really interesting. This is where the more I read this book, and I have read this book probably about 8 times now, the creepier it becomes. Because as a child, I just went, well, of course Sirius is a lonely star who just wants the dogs to live with him, and there's nothing untoward about that. And then you read it again, and you think, actually, it is kind of weird that he plunges them all into darkness, and after giving them happiness, and then he appears, and it is really manipulative, and why does he want them to go to space with him? Why does he want all the dogs? And am I serious? Then some dogs come in to the National Gallery to represent the lost dogs, and this moment always tugs at my heartstrings. So I'm going to try and get through this without weeping openly. Thank you, said the big bony dog. I should tell you first that we admire Sirius and believe in him, and we're deeply grateful for this wonderful day. Some of us had forgotten what it was like not to be hungry, and today we've hardly felt like lost dogs because in a way, all dogs have been lost. I mean, they have all been on their own with no humans to depend on, so we've not felt envious. Oh, none of us will ever forget this day that Sirius has given us. And so do you want to go with him? Said Pongo. Oh no, said the big dog, and the 2 smaller lost dogs also said no in very shrill voices. But why not? Said Pongo, much astonished. We're not ready, said the big lost dog. We want to live our lives here first. Always there is hope for us. Nearly all strays are taken to lost dogs' homes, and then very often kind people come and offer them homes. Most of us can remember homes. Many of those homes weren't good ones, and many of us were turned out, deliberately lost, but we had loved the people who treated us so unkindly, and we want a chance to belong to someone again. You could belong to Sirius, said Pongo. That wouldn't count, said the big lost dog. Everyone would belong to him. We all want someone of our very own. Genuinely choking up, because dogs. They tell Sirius they're not ready to go with him just yet, and he relays that actually all the dogs around the world are kind of coming to the same conclusion, which makes me much less uncomfortable than 3 Dalmatians from Suffolk making decisions for the entirety of dogdom. To his credit, Sirius says that's fine, and he will give them enough power to get back home, but all dogs have to be in their beds by morning of the next day. Just in case you were wondering, all the lost dogs are going to go to Battersea Dogs Home. The ones from London anyway. It's unclear whether lost dogs in places without dogs' homes will go. They start hurrying home. They've got a small child and a tractor to get back, don't forget. But where is Roly-Poly? On this fast swoosh home, who should turn up but Roly-Poly himself? And when they get back, Mrs. says, "Where on earth have you been, my useless child?" It turns out Roly-Poly and the Foreign Secretary went all the way to Paris, had a wild time with some French dogs, then managed to get Sirius to notice them and give them enough swooshing power to get home. Now there's a companion novel I would read. Perhaps one day, Sirius, we shall be ready to join you and accept bliss, but not yet. You see, we do have quite a lot of bliss already. And then Pongo, feeling as young and happy as a puppy, rolled over on his back and went to sleep with his 4 paws in the air. This book, more than pretty much any other children's book I've ever read, is such a product of its time. It's such an interesting exploration of a historical context to read this book now, especially in comparison to the first book written, you know, 11 years earlier. I own this copy, which was a gift because I accidentally and very stupidly got rid of my original, which was a bind-up of the two books, in a book purge ages and ages ago. So my lovely wife bought me this copy because I told so many people about this book and none of them really believed it existed because, let's be honest, it's a little bit far-fetched. Fetched. Like fet, it's a great pun, sorry. But it does exist and you can read it, and I will put a link to where you can get a copy in the description below. If you do read it, or if you have read it, be sure to tag me on social media if you're ever talking about it, or comment below with what you enjoy about this book and what you think is completely baffling. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if there are any other weird sequels you would like me to read and review, or if you would just like to talk about them, do comment them below because I'd love to hear about them. While you're here, why not subscribe? I post bookish content to this channel pretty much every week, so there's lots of exciting things to come up, and it just takes the click of a button, and I'm not too annoying, I promise. That's all from me for now, and I'll see you in the next one. Everything's covered in post-its. I just want all the dogs.